Hello, everybody. Hope you're doing well. Welcome to our webinar launching the Vermont Zoning Atlas. I'm Sarah Bronin, and I help to lead the National Zoning Atlas project and our organization, Land Use Atlas. Joining me today is Aline Fader, the Operations Director of the National Zoning Atlas, who is always at work on all of the projects. And today she's going to feature she's one of our featured speakers for Vermont, but know that she's in the background for all of the other projects as well. And she will be joined by Daniel Wexler, also known as Wex, our geospatial analyst, who pitched in on Vermont during his time with the National Zoning Atlas. I also do want to thank all of our team members who worked on the Zoning Atlas, including one who came from our partner, one of our early partners, Jake Gilbert, who moved from an external contributor role into our full-time service at the National Zoning Atlas team at the national level. Matthew Harris and a number of other of our analyst team has worked on Vermont. So I definitely want to thank our partners in Vermont who helped to build out and support the early versions of the Vermont Zoning Atlas, inspired by Yoshi Bird. I'm not sure if she's joining us today, but a shout out to her who really helped to push the project forward in Vermont. So we built on the efforts of those institutions in the slide, as well as the people who were part of them. So thank you so much for everything that you guys contributed to get us started in Vermont. With that said, I wanted to go over the quick overview of the presentation. So first, why we are building the National Zoning Atlas, that will be my part. Second, how it's made. We want to just refresh everyone on the methodology that we use to build the Atlas. Third, we'll do a little screen share, a slideshow as to how to use the NZA, what the key features are. We might have a few updates if you've been through this part before, and certainly we'll show you how it works in Vermont. Our fourth part of the presentation, really the meat of the presentation, the big trends that we've seen in zoning in Vermont. And you guys have seen the Vermont Atlas online probably over the last few years as it's been populated and updated. So we're just here to give you the summary stats as to what's happening in Vermont zoning in 2026. And then finally, we'll have a few slides highlighting how the state and people in it can use the National Zoning Atlas for a variety of ends. So with that, I'll start with why we are building the National Zoning Atlas in the first place. And if you've heard me say this before, if you visited the Zoning Atlas, you know it is an online map documenting information about zoning. Seems pretty straightforward potentially, but as we have come to understand over 5 years building this project, there's a lot going on in zoning and lots of particulars. Our focus in extracting information about zoning particulars has been about housing. That includes things like where housing can be built, certainly, but also the process that's required to build them, whether that is a public hearing or whether it's a ministerial process. We also have logged lot sizes, parking mandates, lot coverage, floor to area ratio, lots of other things that we can't even stuff into the online map, as well as an understanding of accessory dwelling units, which we know has been a big topic of conversation in Vermont, and the most common non-residential uses, among many other things. But again, our focus has been on housing. And that's because zoning has a huge amount to say about where people live and how they can live and what their opportunities are. Where zoning puts housing has huge impacts on economic growth. And importantly for Vermont, given your long tradition of statewide land use controls and regulation and planning, smart development. So development where people can live near where they work, near where they play. There are a lot of conversations going on right now in Vermont about zoning. Far be it from us to know what all of those are. There's a couple headlines here, one about wetlands, one about housing accessibility in terms of creating new missing middle housing. But it's our view that zoning touches on so many different topics, not just the range of environmental topics that we know are so important to Vermonters, But again, also economic mobility, opportunity, access to education, access to jobs. You name it, I think we can find a zoning tie to it. So, just big picture, the national perspective before I turn it over to Aline. You can find our map if you don't have the URL at zoningatlas.org/atlas. We just finished off our 16th state, that is Delaware. We'll do a webinar about Delaware coming up very soon. And we are making progress in a number of others. The ones on the map are fully complete, but states like Texas and New York, and actually we just polished off the Atlanta metro area. We have a lot of activity happening across the country, and we're really proud of the work we've been able to do, including with our many partners. So as of, I think, a couple days ago, these are our stats. We've published to the map. That means we've figured out whether it has zoning or doesn't. And if it does have zoning, those are the purple areas in the map, as I think Wex is going to tell you in a bit. In those areas, we've logged individual zoning conditions. That has amounted to about 104,000 separate zoning districts covering about 57% of the population of the country, 60% of the land area, and over 1.1 million pages of zoning codes. And yes, we have read all of those pages of zoning codes. Humans have read them and not machines. So joined by two of our humans today, I am going to turn it over to Aline, how it is made, and she is going to walk us through the process that she has helped develop over these last few years as to how the Atlas is made. So thanks, Aline. Take it.
Thank you, Sarah. Just a quick reminder before I start, if you guys have questions along the way, please use the Q&A box, and we'll get to those at the end if we have time. I'm Aline, as Sarah mentioned, and the operations director at the NZA, and I've worked and reviewing data just all over the country. And I'd like to take a bit of a moment to talk about how what the NZA methodology is. Our analysis begins by identifying jurisdictions. These are the cities, counties, towns, villages with zoning authority. And here we see 6 of the 284 jurisdictions that have the right to exercise zoning in Vermont. And our team is able to complete analysis for 100% of the jurisdictions in Vermont. First, we identify whether a jurisdiction enacts zoning, and then we collect the 2 main components of a complete zoning code, the zoning text and the zoning map, and both are very necessary. While the zoning ordinance contains a lot of key information, we also need to know where its provisions apply throughout the jurisdiction and how much land is allocated to each use. And here we see images of the text and map that was used for our analysis of Stowe, Vermont. Each jurisdiction with zoning is made up of zoning districts with different regulations. Here's a screenshot of 13 of the 23 zoning districts in Stowe as they appear in the NZA editor. You can see the district names along with the type of district ranging from primarily residential to non-residential. Most districts in this particular list are base districts, which are the main classifications on the zoning map. But there are also overlay districts, which are districts that overlap one or more base districts to provide additional regulations with the objective of the overlay. With a complete code, team members then follow 2 work streams per jurisdiction: text analysis and geospatial analysis. The text analyst first identifies the list of districts and logs key data points using NZA's standard methodology. The geospatial analyst locates its zoning districts and, depending on the available format, either digitizes a static PDF map or standardizes existing geospatial data. The 2 work streams work hand in hand to create the zoning districts as they appear for each jurisdiction on the atlas. Zoning analysts record up to 200 data points for each district. Key elements include types of housing permitted, from single family to 4 or more multifamily housing, and whether these homes are allowed as a right or require a public hearing. Analysts also log minimum lot sizes, yards, setbacks, building heights, parking requirements, affordable housing provisions, accessory dwelling unit regulations, and a lot more. I'd like to highlight some of the zoning attributes that are unique to Vermont based on our analysis. First off, Vermont really shines in terms of public data access. We found that the zoning was relatively easy to get our hands on. and we were able to get all of the zoning codes in the state. Unfortunately, this is not always the case. Vermont codes are also comparatively short in length, easy to decipher, and had a low number of zoning districts per code. These factors helped with the ease of interpreting and extrapolating data. So thank you for that. Not only does this make our work easier, but it also helps provide greater transparency to homeowners, residents, and builders in the state. Also unique to the Green Mountain State is that zoning seems to really reflect the state's ethos. It's not always the case, but there are definite trends towards the provision of denser mixed-use zoning in downtowns, which can support local businesses, allow for different housing options while creating hospitable streets and public places. And then in the more rural areas, you see supportive zoning in outlying areas that preserve natural land and allow for continued homesteading and recreational activities. I'm now going to turn it over to Wex, who's going to discuss how you can use the NZA.
Thank you, Elaine. I'm Daniel Wexler. I'm a geospatial analyst at the NCA. I've worked with zoning data for a number of states, including North Carolina, Virginia, and Texas, California, and New York, just to like name a few. Um, but yeah, so now that we've covered kind of the basics of how the atlas is populated with zoning data, we're just going to walk through how to use the interactive map and get the most out of its features. To follow along with me, head to zoningatlas.org/atlas. You can use a computer or a mobile phone for this, but just know that the size of the map will be different for both. While you all get set up, I'll share this map view at the national scale. Here, the legend reflects the zone status of the jurisdictions in purple and gray. The areas shown in white are yet to be analyzed and integrated into the NZA. If you have the tribal land and protected land layers on, you will see these green and greenish brown layers. This is most visible in the Western United States. And then in the legend and layers options box in the top left corner, you have a few options to toggle on and off additional layers and features. And you can also change the base map here. Now we'll use the zoom and filter box to explore a chosen geography. When we selected Vermont in the state dropdown, the map zoomed to the state. And then zooming in further allows you to see how different places permit or don't permit housing. We can even be more specific with our geography selection. So we see Burlington, South Burlington in the metro micropolitan area dropdown, Chittenden County in the county dropdown, and then Burlington in the jurisdiction dropdown. The map zoomed into the city of Burlington and outlined the jurisdiction in black. And then also just note that you can only select one jurisdiction at a time. So at this scale, notice that the legend updates to show zoning district type. The light purple areas indicate primarily residential districts, meaning these districts are primarily zoned for residential uses. Dark purple areas then indicate mixed with residential districts, meaning these districts allow for a mix of residential and non-residential uses. And then tan areas indicate non-residential districts, meaning residential as a primary use is prohibited. These zones typically allow for industrial uses or things like airports or open space. And so filters allow you to like really clearly see the ways that zoning permits or constrains residential development. So with that said, let's apply some filters to the map. The show me where people can build box has options for just quick filtering. For example, to show where missing middle housing or apartments are allowed. In this image, we toggled on the single family homes filter, and you can see the map lost some color compared to the default view. Areas remain colored in when their criteria satisfies the selected filters. In other words, this means that you can build a single family home anywhere the map is light or dark purple. In the lower right corner, the filtering results box calculates the zoned acres and number of districts that satisfy the filtering criteria. So according to these results, 49% of zoned acres in Burlington or 10% of zoning districts allow single-family housing by right. And then note that the filtering results only apply to the calculations for the single selected jurisdiction. Going back to the show me where people can build box at the top left corner, we toggled where apartments with 4 or more units can be built. You can see the change in the locations that meet the criteria. According to the filtering results box, you can see that the percentages rise to 60% of zoned acres or 35% of Burlington's zoned districts, meaning the criteria for apartments with 4 or more units. This is one of the rare instances allowances for multifamily housing are actually greater than for single family housing within a jurisdiction. And the difference between where single family and multifamily housing are permitted is readily apparent if we toggle back and forth between these two filters. And now we'll look at the advanced filters box. You can use it for selecting more specific filtering criteria. For example, whether single, 2, 3, or 4+ family housing is also subject to public hearing, minimum parking requirements, or height caps, among other things. We've selected criteria where single family housing is allowed as of right and has a minimum parking requirement. And according to the filtering results, 39% of zoned acres or 6% of zoning districts in Burlington satisfy this criteria. And with that, I'll pass it back over to Aline.
Thank you, X. Now that we're more familiar with the atlas and the database, let's see how Vermont zones. I'm going to start with some statewide figures just to give you a sense of how zoning comes together across Vermont. This screenshot from the atlas shows that most land in Vermont is zoned. In fact, 224 of the 284 jurisdictions have zoning, which is shown in purple, and 60 do not, and these are shown in gray. So across all 224 jurisdictions with zoning and complete codes, we analyzed just over 23,000 pages of zoning ordinance text and logged up to 200 data points for each of the nearly 2,000 districts that make up the zoned land of Vermont. As you saw in the earlier slide, we found an average of 9 districts per jurisdiction and an average of 104 pages per code. As I mentioned, these are lower numbers in terms of what we've seen across the country. And for comparison, Alaska also has about 9 districts per jurisdiction and a slightly higher average of 112 pages per code. And California, which is on the much higher end, has 35 districts and 355 pages per jurisdiction on average. Now let's break down the share of land categories across Vermont. 66% of the land across the state is subject to zoning. This may seem minimal, but 66% is where over 90% of Vermont's population lives. 14% is protected land, which includes Vermont's world-famous forests and nature reserves, and much of what is protected by the Vermont Land Trust. The remaining 21% is unzoned land, which includes the 60 jurisdictions that don't have zoning, tribal land outside of Vermont State Zoning Authority, as well as unzoned private land and rights-of-way within zone jurisdiction. Of that 66% of zoned land across the state, a majority of it, or 94%, allows for housing. That's divided into 57% of the land for residential only and 37% for mixed with residential. Only 6% of the land that is zoned is limited to non-residential uses such as industrial, institutional, commercial, or open space uses. Now let's take a moment to dig into the zoning specifics of residential development in Vermont. First, we'll look at types of housing permitted across the state, and then we'll compare how much land allows multifamily housing in Burlington, the greater Burlington, South Burlington Metro, and Vermont as a whole. Just as a reminder, for this presentation, we'll define multifamily housing as lots that allow 4 or more units on them. This figure shows the share of residential land zoned for different types of housing. From left to right, there are columns for 1, 2, 3, and 4 or more family housing units per lot. The darker blue represents the percentage where housing is allowed by right. The lighter blue requires a public hearing, and gray is where it's prohibited. So 93% of the land allowing residential development across the state allows for 1 unit per lot by right. That means single-family housing can be built on the vast majority of all residential land in Vermont. Now compare this to the 2-family column where it drops down to 68%. Now, 4 or more units are only allowed by right on 11% of Vermont's residential land. We see they're allowed on another 40% of land after public hearing, but these discretionary legal processes add costs, time, and uncertainties that can limit financing opportunities and discourage housing being built altogether. So in many cases, public hearings can, in effect, function as a form of prohibition. Speaking of prohibition, the large gray bar shows the most common approach to 4 or more family housing in Vermont. That is to say, multifamily housing is prohibited entirely on nearly half, or 49%, of residential land across the state. But how does multifamily housing fare in the Burlington and South Burlington metro area? As we can see by these figures, its distribution across the region is far from even. In Burlington, 4 or more family housing is allowed by right on a full 99% of the city's residential land. In this respect, the city's zoning reflects a very strong commitment to housing diversity. It's also notable that in Burlington and South Burlington, a larger share of residential land allows multifamily housing than single-family homes. 99% of Burlington and 95% of South Burlington allow multifamily development as of right, compared to 82 and 85% respectively for single-family housing. While not unheard of, this pattern is uncommon and very encouraging. Multifamily housing is only allowed on 20% of the residential land across the broader metro area, which is nearly double the 11% statewide figure. Let's turn to another important zoning regulation: minimum lot sizes. These rules set the smallest amount of land on which a home can be built. Lot sizes are regulated in terms of either square feet or acres, but these minimums can often be quite large, which effectively mandates unsustainable land-intensive development patterns that fuel sprawl, drive up housing costs, increase commute times and traffic, and limit who can afford to live in a community. As a quick note, for this presentation, we use 40,000 square feet and 1 acre interchangeably, because 40,000 is such a common minimum lot size that it's sometimes referred to as a builder's acre. A big round number like 40,000 simplifies calculations, and it rolls off the tongue easier than the true acre size of 43,560 square feet. But in effect and intention, they're basically the same. This donut chart shows the breakdown of minimum lot size requirements for single-family zoned land across the state. The darker the green, the larger the required lot size. 89% of single-family land requires lots of at least 40,000 square feet, or roughly an acre. Within that, 71% requires 80,000 square feet or more. For context, this is comparable to nearly 1.5 football fields. Also notice that 6% of single-family land has varied lot size standards. This usually means a single zone allows for several single-family housing types where each type is tied to a different minimum lot size, or there are different lot size requirements based on soil type, sewer, or water access. Zooming into the Burlington and South Burlington region, we can see how minimum lot sizes tighten in Burlington and expand as we move outward. Within Burlington and South Burlington, no single-family land requires lot sizes larger than 1 acre. In fact, 100% of the land in Burlington carries no minimums at all. Across the metro, however, the pattern shifts. Only 1% of the land has no minimum lot size. 80% of the single-family land requires lots larger than an acre. And again, statewide, the trend towards large lot development is even more pronounced. 89% of single-family land requires lots an acre or larger, with many requiring far more. 20, 40, or even 100-acre requirements for sprawling single-family estates are not unheard of. Up next are accessory dwelling units, or ADUs. These are secondary homes located on the same lot as a primary residence. ADUs are gaining popularity as a cheaper, flexible, and meaningful way to expand housing options in communities across the country. This donut shows ADU permissions on single-family zoned land across the state. The darkest orange is the most permissive, lightest is the least permissive, and gray is prohibited. While ADUs are allowed by right on 41% of single-family land and prohibited on only 3%, the most common approach to ADUs, which applies to 46% of the single-family zoned land across the state, is to allow them with occupancy restrictions, or rules about who can and/or who must live there. Often, the owner must occupy one of the primary or secondary units. Other times, the ADU is limited to family members, employees, or the elderly. If ADU occupancy restrictions are so common statewide, what does that look like in Burlington? Interestingly, here we see the opposite pattern from other zoning provisions. ADUs are more restricted in Burlington and become less restricted as we move outward. Within Burlington, every ADU in the city is subject to occupancy restrictions. The only exception is the mobile home district where ADUs are entirely prohibited. At the metro scale, this share drops to 77% of single-family land allowing ADUs, but with occupancy restrictions. And the statewide figure drops again to 46%. Finally, let's look at parking mandates. Parking consumes valuable land and can be expensive to build, making it an important regulation to track because those added costs can deter new housing or make it more expensive and may not actually reflect real needs for the humans that live there. In Vermont, 79% of residential lands have rules requiring off-street parking. These regulations apply across your 1, 2, 3, and 4 more family housing treatments. Parking requirements in the South Burlington and Burlington metro area are higher at 97%, while Burlington itself is lower than the state at 66%. There are 0 jurisdictions in Vermont that have eliminated parking requirements, so there's some room to improve here. And now I'm going to pass it over to Sarah, who will tell you a bit more about how to use the tools.
Great. Thanks, Elaine. And keep your questions coming. We are very excited to be able to answer them. So just picking up where Elaine left off, I'm going to now tell you a little bit about how you can use the Zoning Atlas and our tools. And the first big tool is the zoning snapshot tool. So you can create graphics just like the ones you just saw by going to zoningatlas.org/snapshots. And here's how you do it. You navigate to the page, you use the drop down, you can filter for Vermont jurisdictions and then pick the jurisdiction that you want. You can type into that filter. We have chosen in this webinar to focus on Burlington, and I know our former mayor is on the call today. And it's so nice to see you. On the next slide, we're focused on Burlington. So we have Burlington, Vermont, Chittenden County, and then the Burlington, South Burlington metro area. 3 different snapshots at 3 different scales. The local jurisdiction, the county, which includes 20 jurisdictions, and then the metro area, which includes 43 jurisdictions. And it's a little bit hard to see, but if you remember, for example, in the chart showing a few slides ago, showing housing units allowed, those blue, light blue, and gray charts, you can see a difference in the percentage of housing allowed in 1, 2, 3, and 4 family columns in Burlington. So lots of blue, lots of allowed housing versus the metro area as a whole down on the bottom right. So these snapshots are intended to give you a sense of where different regulations occur. I'm also noticing on this one, and we didn't pick up on this, I don't think, but in the minimum lot size donut on the bottom left in Burlington, doesn't look like there are minimum lot sizes in Burlington. And then outside the city, you see a lot more lot size mandates, including those large lots that Elaine was just talking about. The next thing you can do with the snapshots, and again, I'll just give that URL one more time, is to compare neighboring geographies. So I don't want to make this competitive, but I do also see on our call today a member of the New Hampshire Zoning Atlas team. So thank you for joining us as well. And we happen to have picked Vermont and New Hampshire to compare the outcomes as we have them logged on the map. So the purpose of our map, or one main purpose of our map, is to be able to compare geographies. So if we're looking at statewide Vermont versus statewide New Hampshire, we can look at a number of things and see how they play out. So in Vermont, it does look like more housing is allowed, multifamily housing is allowed by right, as well as, more housing is allowed by right in Vermont than New Hampshire, so 11% versus 3%. But New Hampshire has more land that might allow multifamily housing after a public hearing, so that light blue. On the next slide, we have logged the different amounts of land that are required for 1 acre house, one family housing. And we've done that, by the way, too, for 2, 3, and 4 family housing. On the snapshots, we've only shown you the 1 family housing because that is something that people are most commonly interested in. So on this slide, the darkest greens suggest that a large amount of land in both states requires around 2 acres or more, 80,000 square feet or more, whereas a very small amount has those lighter shades or even the white. That said, in New Hampshire, there is more single-family land that does not have any minimum lot size. And in Vermont, there is more single-family land that has large minimum lot sizes, so 80,000 square feet or more. So the darker the green, the higher the lot size. And in the eyes of many, the higher the lot size, the potential worse outcomes from an environmental and land use and sprawl perspective. All right, moving on to by right ADUs. We've logged those from one state to the next. The darkest red shows how much single-family land allows for ADUs by right, so a ministerial approval, without either occupancy restrictions or land subject to a public hearing. So we're looking at both of those in Vermont versus New Hampshire. 16% of land in New Hampshire has that designation, so allowed by right without occupancy restrictions, again, without a public hearing, versus 41% in Vermont. So by this measure, Vermont might be doing a little bit better in terms of permitting ADUs. You'd see also that gray area, prohibited land. Vermont only prohibits ADUs on 3% of its single-family zone land, whereas New Hampshire only prohibits ADUs on more of its land. So these are not by any means, the end of the story, but a snapshot is just that. It's a snapshot that gives you an idea about how these places zone. You can distill these snapshots down to the local level, and you can compare 2 cities, 2 towns, 2 counties with each other and get hopefully a pretty good picture about the relative zoning that you see in multiple jurisdictions. And just in those last 3 slides, you showed that in some ways, if the goal is more permissive zoning for housing, in some ways, Vermont is doing a little better. In other ways, New Hampshire is doing a little better. So friendly competition over. And happy to talk more about the snapshots and their use in the Q&A as well. So last thing I just wanted to mention was that you can learn more about zoning and you can apply these tools in a number of ways. So on our resources page, zoningatlas.org/resources, you can see examples of our analysis. So on this slide, we're showing some analysis of big picture trends in our data. So in zoning practice, 2 of our analysts published a report showing that there were a significant number, about a third of jurisdictions with significant discrepancies in their maps and texts across several jurisdictions that they worked in. We have also issued reports, most recently a full report on zoning in Massachusetts that takes into account the before and after changes in the MBTA Communities Act. And then the third image there is a report from Connecticut, another New England state, of course, from a couple of years ago that we did with the Urban Institute, where they used our data and layered it on top of census outcomes to perhaps not so surprising results about the correlations between exclusionary zoning and demographic and social and economic outcomes. We've also seen that the Zoning Atlas has been used in policies. So when we started the Zoning Atlas in Connecticut in 2020, it was used to arm advocates, including the 3 you see in the image on the left, to help power statewide zoning reforms. And we were really proud of that effort. And the unfortunate statistic in Connecticut's case that we only found by reading 32,000 pages of zoning codes was 91% of the land was zoned for single family housing and just 2% was zoned for multifamily housing. We've also helped to analyze local statewide legislation. So we put out a report for Texas on manufactured housing. That report showed what conditions were now, jurisdiction by jurisdiction across Texas, and what might change with the Senate bill. That bill actually passed, enabling more manufactured housing. And on the right, sometimes we see our data being used in unexpected ways. Unbeknownst to us, the mayor of Phoenix waved around a copy of the Phoenix Zoning Atlas and a hypothetical copy, there's no manual copy, but waved around the Phoenix Zoning Atlas and said that the suburbs the Atlas showed, had to step up to rezone to create more housing. So we're excited anytime elected officials pick up on our work because we know that's helping to influence the policy conversations. Last but not least, because again, we are familiar with the conservation and preservation tradition in Vermont, I wanted to point you to the release this week of the Preservation Atlas, our sister project to the Zoning Atlas, and it is at preservationatlas.org. We have uploaded to the map the historic properties on the local, state, and national registers in Connecticut and Nevada. And we are so excited that we will be able to use it to show a lot of things about the extent to which history is preserved, the impact of it, the rules on our historic places. And at some point, we'll be able to overlay it with the Zoning Atlas, which we've completed both in Connecticut and Nevada. So stay tuned on that. Not sure when we'll get to Vermont. We are going where funding allows, and we'll announce our next state pretty shortly. But back to the Zoning Atlas, we'll close on this slide. Please do use the National Zoning Atlas and share what you find. There is our URL, which I'm sure you know because you got to this webinar. You can always email us and then follow us on our social media. So we have a number of questions, and I'm really excited to get started on those as we, let me just get to the right screen here. And I'll start at the beginning with the first question, and Aline and Daniel, if you guys don't mind coming on screen, that would be great. Excellent. Okay. All right. So the first question, it is a GIS question. So I'm actually going to pitch this over to Wex, if you don't mind. And the question is how protected land is defined. Is it formally conserved, or how do we define protected land? So we saw that on the bar. How do we do that?
Yeah, so I guess in terms of how we define protected land, this includes areas that are legally dedicated to natural, recreation, and like cultural uses, and conservation. So we actually get that information and the space contained by the U.S. Geological Survey.
So it's the PADIS database, the Protected Areas database by USGS. And there's a related question about a different calculation that the state uses in its conservation plan to calculate protected lands, which results in a higher percentage of protected lands than is on our map. So just to explain that, because this is a national project, we take all of our underlying layers, whether that's tribal land, protected land, the FEMA flood zones, or I guess to some extent, the transit stations layer has a consistent methodology for considering what's a transit station across the country. We take all of those from national sources, the first three from the federal government. So you can definitely overlay the additional lands that Vermont recognizes in its conservation plan on our map. I'll just add to that there are local conservation districts that are marked as zone land across our database. So we do log the conservation districts, and we show them primarily as non-residential, Aline, right? Most of them are non-residential, I think.
Yeah, most of the time they tend to be. There are some that actually allow residential at very low densities, so on really large sites or something. But in the most cases, they tend to be non-residential.
Great. And so I think that's another answer. There's a couple questions about the protected lands layer from Vermont. So hopefully that helps it make sense. And again, we know too, in Connecticut, there's a different layer that's used in other states as well. The purpose of our map is to show very consistently how land is treated from one place to the next. So it might show up a little bit differently on our map than the state maps. Okay, next question is, are advocates or people who use this map most interested in the single family layer or the multifamily layer? And Aline, I'm going to turn that one over to you. And I think that question comes from the comment that I made about people are interested in minimum lot sizes for single family housing. But just generally, do you want to talk a little bit about how we approach multifamily housing from a methodological perspective, and maybe why people might be interested in lot sizes for single family housing.
Sure. So multifamily housing is defined differently all over the place. So in some places define multifamily as 2 or more housing units. New Hampshire actually has a lot of 5 or more units. So it varies in terms, but we have found that 4 or more units is the kind of general regulation across the country. So a lot of places have different regulations for duplexes and triplexes versus 4 or more. So that's kind of why we break it down into those 4 categories of 1 family, 2 family, 3 family, and 4 or more. For the minimum lot sizes around single family, because yes, housing advocates are generally interested in multifamily because this is seen as a way to get affordable middle income kind of housing built. One of the issues is that when you increase lot size on single family, it really takes up a lot of land. So then you have less land for your multifamily development. So single family development being the most prevalent development type of housing we have is really constraining where you can put multifamily. So, I mean, on the basic level, it's just we have a defined amount of land in a community. And if you dedicate it, most of it to single family, then it kind of limits what you can do with multifamily. The other thing to note is that a lot of the area that is zoned for multifamily is already built. So a lot of zoning tends to reflect built condition. So because zoning often is enacted after a community is built, especially on the East Coast. So when you have zoning that just reflects the built area and not potential, increase in density, it becomes a real problem and really constrains multifamily, which is why we're so focused on minimum lot sizes for single family. Also, there's a lot of really nice, very kind of like low impact density increases one can do simply by putting housing, single family homes on smaller lots, so it just to decrease car traffic and all of the other negative impacts of those big lots. Does that get to the many issues around lot sizes and density there?
Yes. So I'll ask a different question to you. I think I'll pitch it back to you, Aline, again, which is just a general question first about what is the process for submitting updates? How do we update the map?
Sure. So you could tell us. So telling us is a great thing to do. We have on our we have a website which is zoningatlas.org. And if you go on there, we have our contact information. And I believe the email address is info@zoningatlas.org. So when we sometimes have particular update projects, so we'll know a lot of changes has happened in an area and we'll do a whole area at once. And other times we get one-off notifications, oh, this jurisdiction updated, and we can go in and do it. So it kind of depends on both whether we have a specific project for updates and then also whether or not people like you guys will share that information with us so we can do those updates.
Yes, please do send us information. The online atlas is intended to be a quality control check as the data is publicly displayed. There was a question there about parking elimination in Burlington. So I'm looking at the Burlington zoning code, and in section 8.1.8, off-street parking is eliminated for all residential parking except in those situations where occupancy of a dwelling unit may be by more than 4 unrelated adults. So it could be that that's a narrow exception to the elimination of parking mandates. We will check what we've logged, but it may be that Burlington is still showing as having a parking mandate because of that one little item. In fairness to Burlington, maybe we will look at it and see if we can make a visible atlas note, Aline, maybe, and eliminate it otherwise. But we'll talk about how we've treated other similar situated cities. So this is a great question because it illuminates how every time we make a decision to put something on the map, we have to decide when it might be most commonly treated in one way, but there's an exception that might make it be the regulation be treated in another way. How do we log it? On the map, it's binary. It's either showing as purple or not showing as purple when you ask the filter. So we don't have a way to log all of these different minute conditions that cities may put on the map, but we do like to show, in fairness, good progress, and so we do want to recognize Burlington's progress on that. And we'll take a look at how we do that. All right, there's a question that I'll take, which is how does this project get funded? So our funders are all available on our team site, team page on the website. So if you go to zoningatlas.org/team, the majority of our funding has been received from funders, institutional funders, community foundations, and others. We have both used that funding to build out geographies, to build out the infrastructure for the project, and to do updates. So we were fortunate to have received funding from a California-based foundation, as well as Connecticut-based foundations, for example, to do Connecticut and California updates this year. We have not received any independent funding in Vermont, so our work to clean up Vermont and to add and to update as we have over the last part of last year, maybe first part of this year. I think, Elaine, you correct me if I'm wrong, but somewhere in that time period has come out of our general unrestricted funds. So we were happy to do that because of all the work that the external team put in, and we wanted to be sure that it was really meshed with our data. So we put in the time unfunded for Vermont. That's how much we wanted to get this project done. But mostly it's larger foundations. We have never received funding from municipalities, so that's a question whether it's municipalities have asked us to analyze their zoning. We're really looking at things from a regional scale. So when we go into a geography, for example, in Kansas City, we received money from the Kansas City Foundation to review the 200 plus jurisdictions in that metro area. We really only work at the scale of metro areas because we think that's how you understand how the zoning dynamics actually work in a place. So we're also working right now in Seattle and a couple of other places. Okay, back to the map. How does the Atlas reconcile its district-based housing-focused metrics with the reality that Vermont zoning development outcomes are largely governed by the spatial intersection of multiple overlay districts? Maybe, Elaine, it's a good time to talk about our slices. Should we? I think that's what the overlay question is referring to, because we do log overlays. Yeah.
Well, we do log overlays. So when you look at the map, it does kind of when we pull the statistics in the snapshots, for instance, it does do an assessment of what's the base district and then each overlay, and there can be multiple. Now, I do want to clarify that we only provide the zoning data. So if you're referring to other sorts of overlays through other legal or state legislation, those are not necessarily in here. So as an example, flood zone overlays will be in there if they're in the zoning. So sometimes regulations like that, or there might be a separate outside ordinance that we don't know about that has some special thing, but we're really focused, because if we did every law that affects every jurisdiction in the country, that would be a bit much. I don't think we're there yet. So we really are narrowly focused on the zoning regulations. We don't incorporate building regulations or other things like that. So I don't know if that helps, but yes, we do look at every zoning district, whether that's a base district or any overlays. So if it's not in the zoning, it might not be incorporated. If it is, it is.
Yeah, and in our parlance, we call that the zoning slice methodology. So if you can dig back through and behind the scenes, Diana Droger is maybe posting this in the chat. If you dig back through our LinkedIn posts, you can read a little bit more about that methodology. There's a question here about site plan review in Vermont, and I don't know if we have an answer specific to site plan review and how it treats 3 and 4 family dwellings. In the snapshots, though, you can see whether there is a public hearing that's required for 3 and 4 family dwellings. So I'm not sure if that we can. Well, I can just pull up the snapshot on my own computer. I think it was 40% that was showing in the light blue, where public hearings are required across the state for 3 family buildings, and for 4 family buildings, it looks like the stat is the same. So, yeah. Elaine, do you have anything to add on that?
Yeah, just add that our methodology, we do look for public hearings. So if there is site plan review that requires a public hearing, we treat it as public hearing. If there's site plan review that is purely ministerial, we do not. So we don't call out site plan review as a specific process. separate from whether or not it's a public hearing based process. And we are agnostic about who's the public hearing. So if it's the planning board or the zoning board or the whichever board it is that happens to be doing the public review, even if it's the town council, if that's listed in the zoning code, we identify it as a public hearing, if that makes sense. And then so site plan review can fall into either of those buckets. In many places across the country, it's often the ones that end up in public review, though, as a general thing. But sometimes it's ministerial.
Thank you. And I think we have time for just a couple more quick questions. One is a revelation, perhaps. It says that it seems that some of the data indicates that local laws are not aligned with state laws related to accessory dwellings. Maybe I'll pitch this back to Aline. I don't want to keep putting you on the spot. I'm happy to take this one too, but maybe you can talk about how we've seen in other states, Connecticut and California, for example, statewide, and here too, statewide ADU rules where the local jurisdictions haven't caught up.
Yeah, so it is the case that local zoning laws don't always align with state regulations in a number of ways. And we do try to track state laws regarding land use regulations so we can see where these discrepancies are. We don't publish that to the map, but it is often the case that, in Connecticut, we did track where they were meeting the state versus not meeting the state regulations. So internally we have some data on that, but yeah, when a state law is enacted, the local jurisdiction usually is given a grace period to come into compliance. A lot of places do, some places don't, because they have to go through a public hearing process. And if the community is against it, it might get voted down. We saw that happen a couple of times, I think, in Massachusetts with their density increases around metro areas outside of Boston. So it does vary, and yeah, sometimes local laws are not in compliance with state laws. That happens.
So, and it could be too that certain aspects of the local law haven't caught up. For example, I think in Vermont there is a 900 square foot threshold. So they have, again, correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe it's local jurisdictions have to permit ADUs up to 900 square feet. They may not have differentiated in their code yet that less than 900 square feet ADUs are permitted, more than 900 square feet ADUs greater than 900 square feet are permitted only after a public hearing or whatever. So you might also be seeing a sort of I don't know if it's just not yet approach to distinguishing between those. To really do an analysis of this, as we've done, for example, in Massachusetts, the before and after the MBTA communities law, we really, and this goes back to the question on funding. If we have funding to do that kind of analysis, we can do it, and we love to do it, actually. So if that's something that's of interest for folks in the state, we're happy to do that analysis of to what extent local governments are not compliant, what are the provisions, and even I don't think occupancy, I don't think that I could be wrong again, but I'm not sure that the Vermont statute really addresses all the different occupancy requirements that we see: owner occupancy, renter prohibitions, employee family occupancy, and elderly only requirements. Those are the 4 provisions that we track when it comes to ADUs. The Vermont law, I don't think, addressed any of those, or maybe just one of those. I'm not entirely sure. So there are other prohibitions on ADUs that other states like California, which has gone back again and again to revise its statewide legislation, have continued to strip away, and that has proven to be very successful in California. All right. Let's just take one last question, which is how does one ask for the city or state zoning to be analyzed or added to the National Zoning Atlas? So WEX has been part of the new jurisdictions that we've received requests for and funding for. We welcome you to contact us by email if you're interested in getting your city or state up on the National Zoning Atlas. We've heard from people in virtually every state except for the Dakotas, I think. But Elaine, have we heard anything from the Dakotas?
No, I think, yeah. And I want to say maybe there's a couple in the like southeast maybe we haven't heard from, but maybe we have.
No, we have. Have
We've gotten
interest
all of
in
the, yeah, okay.
Mississippi,
All the,
Arkansas.
yeah.
So we take a, we've heard from a lot of people who want their places in the map. Feel free to email us. We're happy to pursue leads in those states for partnerships and funding and all of that. So I think we'll close it there. We might already be over time. Diana Drogeris behind the scenes, running the whole show. Thank you for setting this up. Thanks to everybody for attending. Wex, thank you for your geospatial analysis here. It did a lot of cleanup, a lot of jurisdiction resolution. And thanks, Elaine, too, for supervising this work and overseeing the whole project. This will get posted online very soon. Thanks, everybody. Have a great day.